weary soul to Nocturne Lore. Breathe with me now. Let the weight of the day fall from your shoulders. You are safe here in the quiet between heartbeats. Tonight, we drift together into the deep past. Close your eyes. The galaxy can wait. Sleep now while the stars burn. Your breath is slow now. I hear it in the fragile rhythm of your chest, like distant surf against blackened stone, and I match it with my own, as I have done for 10,000 years, as I will do until the last star gutters into silence. I sit beside your failing light, waning age, a remembrancer who never learned how to die, a witness who carried too much into forever. And tonight, I loosen my grip on memory, just enough to let one sorrow drift free, gently, carefully, so it does not wake you. Feel the weight leave your chest now. Let the pain soften at the edges. Let the past loosen its claws. You are drifting, drifting. Once, before rust learned how to eat suns, before prayers turned into weapons, there was a sky the color of pale gold, and it did not yet know how to fall. I remember my name unburdened, my heart foolish enough to trust the sound of laughter echoing through marble halls. The great ones walked openly, then not as myths, not as nightmares, but as towering shapes of warmth and certainty. Their voices low and steady, like thunder heard from very far away. Brothers stood unbroken at their sides. Banners slept in still air, and the future pretended it would be kind. We did not know we were already standing inside a wound. There was a city then, white as old bone, ringed with silent waters, crystal and oath. Light, and I was small there, smaller than breath, but I heard everything. Secrets fall differently than words. They sink instead of scattering, and I learned to feel them pass through a room long before anyone dared speak them. On the night the lie was born, braziers burned low without being touched, and ash fell inside the chamber. Though there was no fire above, I felt it settle on my lashes, soft as gray snow, warm as dying skin. A hand brushed my shoulder as I turned. A son of the war, gods themselves, helm cradled beneath his arm, eyes made gentle by shadow, and something that trembled just beneath resolve. He did not know he was already betraying someone, but the future knew, and the night remembers. The galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. Breathe that in slowly. Let it pass through you. Like distant rain, I followed whispers through galleries of sleeping stone, through archives where parchment rustled like tired leaves. Each step wrapped in incense meant for endings. They spoke in fragments, in glances, in pauses too long to be innocent. A fleet repositioned not war, but for silence. A signal folded to static. A corridor cleared just before arrival. Treachery does not announce itself. It prepares beds for the dead. The brother I followed wore loyalty like a second skin. Yet his shadow lagged half a heartbeat behind him, as if even the dog did not trust where he was going. We came at last to a balcony overlooking the quiet sea, and the water reflected stars that would one day burn worlds. Though none of us knew their names yet, he spoke then, very softly, so softly even his courage could barely hear him. Sealed with blood, Not yet. It was sealed with relief. Relief is the first true sin of betrayal. Behind him, unseen by his turning, another presence waited within the drape of shadow, tall, unmoving, ancient as abandonment. I did not light refuse to obey. It nodded once, and all of history exhaled, far away, in places not yet named. Oaths loosened in their sleep, dreams broke their own spines, and brothers shifted in the dark as if cold hands had brushed their necks. Feel your breath now, slow, ash warm as candle smoke. The city did not fall that night. It merely began the long process of learning how. I walked its lower tiers as dawn failed to arrive. Bells muffled themselves in cloth, and servants moved as if the air had thickened around their limbs. Raised, no trumpet ever sounded, and yet everyone felt the absence of something weighty lift from their shoulders without knowing what had been taken. That is how the lie worked, like a theft of gravity in the scriptoriums. I watched words rewritten while the original ink still bled through beneath. The past and future pressed together like damp pages. I began recording what my superiors could not yet see, or perhaps were too afraid to name. Patterns always arrive before meaning, fleet movements that resembled pilgrimages instead of patrols, supply routes redirected toward empty horizons, diplomatic envoys sent to men no one acknowledged ruling anything, and always the same quiet hands smoothing the path behind them. I spoke once to a woman who had mapped the migrations of the war, hosts since the early dawn, and when I named what I feared, hands did not tremble. She only closed her eyes and whispered goodbye to someone far away. And the night remembers. The galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. Let that refrain cradle you gently, like cold silk drawn across fevered skin, and low red sun that the brother revealed himself fully. Though even then, he pretended it was devotion. He stood before his warriors, banners hanging still in air that storm should have owned, and spoke of destiny as if it were a sanctuary and not a grave. I remember the way the wind would not carry his voice beyond the circle of his chosen, as though the world itself refused to testify. His brothers felt the shift before they understood it. Loyalty fraying at the hem, certainty thinning like worn cloth. Some wept without knowing why, some smiled. The shape of the coming war. It would not roar at first, it would whisper. It would walk through unlocked doors, sit at familiar tables, and poison cups that had never known an enemy's touch. Even now, as your breathing slows and your eyelids surrender, that is still how the galaxy prefers to die, through trust. The first brother fell without falling at all. He simply did not arrive where he was expected to be, and the records rewrote him into absence. No grave, no fury, just a quiet correction. A line smoothed away as if it had still waited in its shrine, polished by hands that did not yet know they were orphans. I stood there alone when they finally powered it down. The machine, spirit dimming like a tired candle, and ash drifted across the threshold, though there was no fire for 1,000 kilometers. Safe now. That moment cannot harm you. It only passes through like dream weather. The plot coiled tighter after that, paths narrowing, decisions becoming inevitable. The way deep water becomes inevitable to those who step too far from shore. Two brothers met beneath long after, their ships hanging in orbit like thoughts that refused to resolve. They spoke of duty, of fear, of what the future would become if neither of them acted. One lied without knowing it. The other told the truth without understanding it. When they parted, one carried hope into darkness. The other carried darkness, wrapped in hope. I still do not know which fate was kinder. The first true casualty of the Shadow War was not a warrior. It was a signal station, its crew sedated into sleep while false orders passed through their own hands. They died weeks later without waking when the air ran out. No one called it murder. The records classified it as drift. Loss. That is how betrayal learns to speak the language of bureaucracy. The council fractured soon after, not in anger, not in accusation, but in scheduled audiences. 1,000 small absences masquerading as inconvenience. I delivered messages that were never meant to be answered. I archived requests already condemned to delay, and each time I did, I felt the shape of the lie. Immortality truly meant. It meant never being allowed to forget what you failed to stop. And the night remembers. The galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. Let the phrase rock you slowly, like a vessel on starless seas. On the eve before of the galaxy still believed in dawn, I stood alone on a flight deck, washed in low amber light. Dropships rested like slumbering beasts, hulls beaded with condensation that fell like soft rain onto the metal below. Each drop was a counted life. The brother who had first whispered the lie walked among the vessels, then touching armor with reverent fingertips, blessing warriors who had already surrendered their names to history's omission. When he reached me, he paused. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw regret rise behind his eyes like distant lightning. Then, it was gone. He thanked me for remembering him kindly, long before the galaxy had decided how it would remember him at all. I am still deciding. Your breathing is deep now, slow as orbital drift, and the stars above you burn without urgency. There are many betrayals yet to come, many brothers yet to fall without falling, and many worlds that will learn to burn quietly, but not tonight. Tonight, we rest inside the moment, before everything broke, where trust still pretended it was heavier than fear, where banners still slept, where ash had only just begun to fall. Sleep now. We will return to the shadows together when you are ready. Sleep with me again. Far away soul, already pretending to be whole. After the ships lifted from the amber, lit deck, after the brother carried his almost regret into the cold, the city began to empty without ever appearing to do so. Corridors grew wider without changing their stone. Halls seemed before, and footsteps learned how to vanish between one heartbeat and the next. I moved among clerks who no longer looked up when I passed, among archivists who sealed records without reading the final lines, and among augurs who tuned their lenses away from certain regions of the void, as if their instruments had learned shame. The lie was becoming gentle. The most dangerous lies always are. In the upper orreries, where stellar engines whispered their ancient calculations, I watched navigation paths soften into new curves, not sharp enough to arouse suspicion, just altered enough to carry entire fleets where they would not be missed until absence became irreversible. I traced those curves with shaking fingers and felt my breath falter for the first time since immortality had claimed me, because they did not lead outward. They led inward, toward the patient, dark between heart systems, where signals drowned, where witnesses vanished, and where intent could ripen unseen. Feel your breath with me now, slow as drifting ash, steady as the tolling of a distant bell. I was summoned one cycle later to a chamber whose windows, beneath layers of devotional haze, inside 3 figures waited at a triangular table of old obsidian. 2 in the colors of loyalty, 1 in the shadow of something beginning to call itself freedom. They did not speak of rebellion. They spoke of necessity. Words like preservation, inevitability, course correction were laid gently between them, like offerings to a god none of them dared name aloud. I stood behind them and recorded everything, even the pauses that tasted of surrender. One spoke of a future where order would be preserved through a stronger hand. Spoke of a future where obedience would save the many from the chaos of the few. The third said nothing at all. Silence was his doctrine. When the meeting ended, none of them looked at one another, and yet all 3 wore the same expression: relief. That was when I knew the wound could no longer be closed. And the night remembers. The galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. Let that memory drift through you like a tide that never rushes. The first overt act of concealment came disguised as mercy. A front contagion, not of flesh, but of thought. A pattern of dissent moving between workers like a shared dream instead of war. Envoys were sent instead of judgment. Relief ships arrived. They brought medicine, translators, counselors, and sealed the atmosphere grids while the people slept. By the time the world realized it had been quarantined, all outgoing data had been replaced with ghosts of its own broadcasts, looping endlessly into emptiness. No invasion was ever logged, only silence. I read the last unaltered transmission from that world. It ended with a child asking if the rain would ever stop. I still hear it when real rain taps against metal. It falls more slowly now. Elsewhere, brothers began to test the edges of disobedience. A regiment that held position too long. A fleet that arrived just late enough to matter. Courier, whose vessel vanished between 2 verified beacons. Each incident dismissed alone. Each pattern undeniable when assembled. But no one assembled them, because no one wanted to be the first to say the word that would reshape every other word around it. Betrayal, so it remained, unspoken and therefore unchallenged. I moved between gatherings like a shadow taught to listen, carrying sealed thoughts from one hand of power to another. Each message wrapped in ceremony, in trust, in the shared weight of history. And every time I delivered one, I felt the fracture widen beneath my feet, two brothers, once inseparable, met within a vaulted meditation chamber beneath a ceiling of artificial stars. They had been raised like mirrored sons of fate, trained together, bled together, sworn to uphold the same unbreakable future. Now circled one another in language instead of steel. One asked whether obedience could still be called virtue when the command was flawed. The other asked whether doubt could still be called loyalty when it weakened resolve. They spoke for hours without raising their voices. At the end, they embraced. At the beginning of the next cycle, their fleets began preparing against one another without ever naming why. The galaxy was holding its breath. So are you now. Feel how soft the pause is between inhale and release. How forgiving the space can be. I wish the stars had let that skill earlier. The secret councils multiplied. Some gathered in ship, holds lit only by navigational glow. Some in sanctums sealed with promise, locks that only answered to blood. Others met nowhere at all, exchanging intent through staggered relays. Message, I charted what I could, but the map grew too large for any mind to hold whole. And that, I came to understand, was the point, to fracture responsibility until no single soul could be said to have chosen the path, only followed it. The brother of the amber deck returned. During this time, his bearing heavier, his voice slower, his shadow no longer lagging behind him. It moved ahead now. He summoned me alone in his chamber. Banners had been folded away, and the walls bore the marks of removed emblems, pale outlines of what once had been worthy of display. He asked me what history would call him. I told him I did not know. He seemed relieved by that too. He said names were prisons. I did not argue when he dismissed me. I felt something brush my mind like distant wind across burial stone. A farewell. Soon after, the first oath was broken loudly enough for the galaxy to hear, but softly enough that most pretended not to. A defense platform failed to respond during a routine aggression suppression, and an allied city burned beneath orbital shadow. Declaration of responsibility blamed malfunction. The declaration of mourning blamed chance. The declaration of consequence blamed no one at all. Yet, in the dark, between the words, everyone read the truth. The future had begun to choose sides. Remember as the galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. Let the words settle like ash upon calm water. I was present when the first brother realized he had been shaped into a blade aimed at his own kind. His discovery came not through treason, obedience. An order passed through 3 sealed relays and arrived at his command throne, already sanctified by authority. He was to withdraw support from a corridor whose defense relied upon his presence alone. He asked who would hold it. He was told someone always did. Fell. 17 million lived there. None were mentioned again. He locked himself into prayer. Chambers for 9 days. On the 10th, he emerged and gave the withdrawal order exactly as written. That was when his loyalty inverted without changing its shape. Machines began to shift their stances by degrees too small for panic. But large enough for Destiny to notice. Armor was repainted to match ceremonial functions instead of parade livery. Munitions were stockpiled beneath audit thresholds. Supply lines learned how to end in plausible shortages. The careful mathematics of slaughter were being solved in advance. I walked among the engines that would soon burn brothers from the sky, resting my palm upon their warm casings, whispering apologies that could not be heard by metal or fate. Night gathered its strength in layers, not as storm, as gravity. You are drifting now, deep enough that the edges of my voice blur with your own dreams, and that is good. The deeper you drift, the less sharp the sorrow becomes. The final council before the fracture was held, beneath false dawn light, projected across an artificial firmament. Those who attended believed they were there to settle logistics. They were there to divide the future. Voices remained calm, words remained precise, but the space between every sentence grew immense. I watched brothers measure one another by what no longer needed to be. When the last formal ascent was recorded, bell rang softly through the chamber. Ceremonial. Preservation. My handlers no longer pretended they were impartial. Populations dim hues. Transmissions reduced to devotional rhythm. Sleep was becoming policy, and wakefulness a risk. The last image I saw before the jump search took us beyond charted recursion was a signal flare ascending from a moon that had not been scheduled to burn. It rose in silence, without sound. Then even its memory degraded. Feel how far away that all is now. How safe your breath has become from it. When we emerged, the sky was wrong. Stars stood in unfamiliar patience, and the darkness between them was too complete. Too well organized. Plots matured, where brothers would soon arrive, not as guests, but as consequences. I was settled into an observation sanctum, with walls of softly glowing script, each line tracking a thread of movement I was not permitted to alter. I watched the preparations for war unfold, like slow choreography, not the clash, only the dance before it. And the most terrible truth became clear at last. The betrayal was already complete. The war would only be its echo. And the night remembers. The galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. Now gently, without needing to understand it fully, there are still deeper shadows ahead. But not tonight. Tonight, the plots only tighten, and nothing has yet learned how loudly it will soon scream. Sleep now. Sleep with me again. You are already far. Waking, your breath, a quiet tide, beneath all remaining thought. And I follow it as I once followed the shadow of intention across a galaxy, learning how to betray itself. From the observation sanctum, where I was laid like a seed of memory, I watched the first arrivals slip into the wrong sky. They came as allies, as pilgrims, as reinforcements called. By necessity, no one publicly acknowledged. Their vessels bore familiar silhouettes, yet the cadence of their approach had changed. Engines breathing more slowly, auger signatures masked beneath distortion. Even the void treated them differently, bending its distance in small mercies, delaying detection by fractions of a second that would one day cost worlds. The watchers beside me whispered, that it was nothing, only recalibration drift. All sensors, but I felt the weight of their arrival settle into my bones like cold silt, because arrivals always matter more than departures. In the lower hall of receiving, banners were unfurled that had not been displayed in a century, their colors deepened by ceremonious shadow, sigils softened by low light, so none would read too closely. The brother who had first learned to lie entered beneath them with the grace of a returning hero. Voices rose in formal welcome, hands struck armor in rhythmic honor, and all of it sounded like soil falling onto a coffin from very far away. He embraced his counterparts with arms that remembered how to save, while his heart rehearsed how to end. They spoke of shared victories, of old campaigns, of battles that still belong safely to the past. Each story a stone laid gently across the mouth of the few sanctum above. I logged every cadence, every pause, every micro-hesitation that tasted of unspoken consequence. The archive spirits purred in agreement, as if comforted by all that was being preserved. They did not know they were gathering needles for the shroud of the age. Feel your breath now, soft and unbroken, as if it were falling through velvet dark. That night, I dreamed of a stair made entirely of hands. They reached upward from a pit I could not see into palm upon palm, grasping for a light that did not know how to touch them. I woke with the taste of iron memory at the back of my mouth, and the night remembers. The galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. Let those words be your railing as the stair descends. The first covert alignment happened, not through force, but through harmonization, retuned to shared frequencies that carried intention alongside instruction. Two distant commands began to share timing without ever coordinating openly. 1,000 small movements overlapped too perfectly to be coincidence, and too subtly to be accusation. It was collaboration wearing the mask of routine. Then came the quiet purges, not executions. Reassignments. Officers whose loyalty ran too straight were promoted into ceremonial irrelevance. Strategists with inconvenient pattern recognition were transferred to frontier quiet. Messengers with brittle ethics were rotated into silence beneath layers of redeployment protocol. They vanished without a scream, without a file marked closed. Somewhere out there, they continued to breathe, and that mercy would one day hurt more than death. The brother who had asked me about names began to change then, not in posture. In absence, he attended fewer councils, sent fewer direct communiques, and when he did speak, he spoke through vectors, 3 or 4 removes from his true voice. He was learning how not to be seen while being obeyed. When I encountered him again, it was within a shrine, muted light, where statues of ancient triumphs had been veiled for preservation. He asked me what I saw when I looked upon him now. I told him I saw a man standing between 2 mirrors, reflected endlessly in decisions he had not yet admitted were his own. He did not answer, but he did not deny it either. Outside that shrine, a planet was quietly being converted into a relay of compliant absence. Atmospheric regulators were adjusted to induce shared lethargy within the populace. Public illumination was shifted toward low-spectrum hues that softened descent into dream over months. The people slept more, spoke less, and when orders came, they obeyed without remembering the meaning of resistance. By the time distant authorities realized the population had effectively been anesthetized into obedience, the relay function was complete. Longer belonged to itself. It had become a throat through which intent could pass unseen. I began to understand then that the coming war would not be fought only with weapons. It would be fought with architecture of thought, with sleep, with silence. Habit. Breathe now. Let your chest rise without effort. Let it fall without question. In the vaults beneath the observatory, ancient engines were awakened that had not sung since the earliest expansions. Their machine spirits stirred like old librarians annoyed at being disturbed. Were not engines of destruction. They were engines of certainty. Devices that synchronized consequence across impossible distance. Once activated, they ensured that separated actions would resolve as if performed within the same heartbeat. The betrayal no longer needed had become a system. The first synchronized silence occurred across 3 sectors, separated by half a standard year of void travel. Within the same second, 3 listening posts went dark, not destroyed, muted. Their crews placed into suspended metabolic drift by environmental harmonics they had not known were installed. No distress signal escaped, no debris field testified. Only the absence of noise confirmed the success of the test. I signed the archival confirmation with hands that felt no longer my own, because the pen was lighter than the consequence. Across the wrong sky, more brothers gathered beneath banners that meant too many different things to too many different hearts. They spoke of preservation again, always preservation, as if the universe were a fragile heirloom that required breaking to be saved. One asked whether history could forgive what necessity demanded. Another asked whether forgiveness was even required. Silence answered both of them better than words ever could. And the night remembers. The galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. Let the phrase soften the edges of the memory as it passed. The first open doubt came from a commander who had lost too many ships to logistical miracle. He studied the numbers until they confessed inconsistency. He traced the supply curves backward until he found corridors that should not have existed. He requested clarification 3 times through proper channels. On the 4th, his request never arrived because he did not arrive with it. His flagship was discovered months later, adrift within a stellar nursery. Its drive core cold, its crew asleep, undisturbed, preserved in a silence only of pause. They were never awakened. No one admitted to giving the order. No one needed to, because the silence itself had become command. I began to fear sleep then, even more than death, because death ended testimony. Sleep merely delayed it until prevented. On a world of basalt plains and whispering mineral storms, 2 brothers met without witnesses. One had come to warn, one had come to persuade. What words passed between them, I never learned. But when they departed, each carried away a different version of the truth, and both believed they had won. Within 3 standard cycles, their respective commands began preparing for mutually exclusive futures. The war was learning how to mirror itself. That was when the first mournful bells began to sound across independent shrine networks without shared timing. Toad. Their toll mismatched, their rhythms imperfect, yet the effect was universal. A mourning without declared cause. Across thousands of worlds, people paused in their routines with the shared sensation that something sacred had already died. They did not yet know its name, did I? In the sanctum, the lines of motion began converging too rapidly to ignore. Fleet sigils overlapped within contested zones where protocol demanded dispersal. Resource allocations doubled without conflicting requisitions. Orders that should have contradicted arrived or reconciled. It was beautiful in its precision, terrible. I realized then that even if every commander repented at once, even if every brother turned back toward the original light in the same instant, the system would still carry the war forward to completion. Because the mechanism longer required belief, only momentum, I sent a final warning through channels that had not yet been dulled into obedience. It carried no accusation, only a pattern, only the shape of inevitability. 3 answered, 2 disappeared. 1 went to ground with his fleets and began preparing for a war he still refused to believe would come. He would be called traitor by both sides. Eventually, the most honest fate available. You are drifting so deeply now. The sorrow reaches you only as temperature, not as shape. That is how it should be. I was summoned once more by the brother of almost regret on the eve of what later histories would simplistically call the fracture. His chamber was empty of even the walls had been stripped to undecorated mat. He stood at the center like a shadow cast by something already gone. He asked me whether the universe would remember their intentions or only their outcomes. I told him the universe rarely differentiates between the two. He said then that he hoped at least one witness would survive long enough to argue with the outcome. I did not tell him how tired I already was when I left him. The air tasted faintly of storm. Metal, that charged stillness before collapse across the wrong sky. The first formal mobilization orders were being disguised as ceremonial convergence. Across loyal corridors, defensive preparations were being logged as routine drills, and across the sleeping worlds, the lullaby of obedience was nearing its final cadence. And the night remembers. The galaxy sleeps. Long night is kind. Let that be the last shape your mind holds tonight. We are very near the moment where whispers will no longer suffice. But you need not go there yet. Not now. Sleep. Sleep with me again. Your breath has learned the shape of the dark now. It moves without resistance, without urgency, and I follow it as the galaxy drifts closer to the moment it can no longer delay. The ceremonial convergence began beneath banners that had once meant unity. Worlds opened their void, ports in ritual welcome. Stations aligned their course, hospitality perfected over centuries, and fleets entered, shared anchor pattern, as if by choreography, written long before any of them were born. From afar, it looked like celebration from within. It felt like an exhale that never quite finished, leaving the lungs upon one another within the gravity wells of polite space, hulls brushing invisibly close, weapons slumbering behind seals of diplomatic pretense, augur arrays braided together in shared compliance. No one spoke of targeting, yet every silhouette was already memorized by those who would soon need to erase it. The first confrontation did not announce itself as such. Two commanders met along a transit spur that had been quietly redrawn months earlier, a corridor once used for pilgrimage and exchange. Their escorts held position at extreme range, protocols obeyed to the letter, while every spirit on every deck felt the pressure of something that did not belong to the ritual. They spoke of supply discrepancies, of resource inefficiencies, of misfiled directives, all the safe words people use when they are afraid to name the shape standing behind the conversation. At last one of them asked, almost gently, whether the other had received the unsealed version of the mobilization order. The pause that followed was longer than any silence permitted by etiquette. The answer, when a transit spur burned within the hour. Not in battle, in misunderstanding refined into annihilation. Both detachments believed the other had already crossed the invisible threshold, where restraint no longer applied. Each acted in defensive anticipation occurred, which is how wars prefer to be born. I recorded the exchange from the sanctum, where consequence is only ever observed after it has already resolved. Light bloomed in controlled equations, blossomed, folded inward, and left only expanding debris, flowers of rust. In glass, the official declaration named it accident, compounded by system fault. The private reaction named it permission. And the night remembers, the galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. Let that settle. Reaches sound. Across the gathering fleets, discipline tightened without instruction. Crew rotations slowed. Weapon calibrations extended longer than required. Targeting augurs were given revised tolerances under pretext of ceremonial shielding adjustments. No one needed order to prepare. The preparation had already been installed months ago in the language of quiet correction. On a listening world whose mountains sang softly with mineral resonance, the population gathered in dream, temples to share what they believed were communal omens. Each dream followed the same contours, a sky breaking apart without falling, a bell tolling without structure, hands reaching upward from a dark that offered no bottom. The priests reassured them. It was symbolic. The machines beneath the altar confirmed. It was synchronized. There would be no... When the first Skyfire arrived, the brother who had asked me about names did not attend the convergence. His absence was officially attributed to strategic redistribution. In truth, he had moved beyond the threshold where visibility was still required. From hidden stations nested inside artificial knolls, his will began to shape flows of violence without ever standing near their edge. War, once it learns how to automate itself, no longer needs heroes, only accountants. The brother of almost regret did attend. He stood among those who still pretended the ritual mattered. His form as imposing as ever, his voice just as steady, Yet, something in the fabric of shadow clung to him differently now. It folded into his outline, as if he were becoming a shape the dark preferred to remember. He did not look at me when I observed from the upper vaults. I think he had learned that witnesses weigh more than accusation. A council was convened under pretense of final certification. The largest of the chambers was opened. The one reserved for moments the future would pretend were inevitable. They seated themselves according to precedents that no longer corresponded to allegiance. Some faced allies, some faced predators. None of them faced the truth directly. The opening addresses spoke of vigilance, of adaptation, of the need to preserve the original vision through decisive intervention. Always preservation. Decisive. Never once did anyone speak the word end. When the last speech faded into sanctioned silence, biometric assent cascaded through the chamber like falling leaves, each confirmation clean, irreversible, legally immaculate. The war was now conscience. In the sanctum, the system acknowledged the transition state with a single soft tone. Not a trumpet, not an alarm, just a quiet confirmation that history had passed a point it would not be permitted to revisit. Feel your breath against hollow metal. The first coordinated strike occurred beyond all converging fleets, far from ceremony, far from witnesses, a relay world of no strategic beauty, only perfect positioning. Strike craft approached under the guise of atmospheric survey. Turrets tracked them with routine curiosity. The machines below the crust were already folding into themselves. The planet did not explode. It dimmed. Its core slowed into thermal discontinuity. Its magnetic shell unraveled, and gravity loosened its patient grip. Within hours, oceans fled into space as drifting shrouds. Within days, the crust fractured into slow dispersal. No official report called it destruction. The term used was decommissioning. By the time the main fleets learned the relay corridor had vanished entirely, the war already had a mouth open. Some commanders still resisted believing it. They clung to the idea of localized insurrection, to the comfort that scale might be limited, that intent might remain contained. They were good hearts. History is rarely gentle with such hearts. Within a single standard cycle, relay points failed in slow absence across 3 sectors. By then, to doubt the pattern required an act of faith stronger than any religion had ever demanded. The brother who had prepared for war while refusing to believe it now found his position compromised, made him trustworthy. His fleets were encircled by convergence, not through aggression, but through overlap. Allies whose arrival was too well timed to be coincidence. When he protested, he was reminded of shared doctrine, shared sacrifice, shared the convergence. The responses differed only in phrasing. Everyone did, and therefore no one. The last message he sent, before communications collapsed, spoke only of sorrow. Not fear, not anger, only sorrow that the galaxy had chosen to explain necessity, never learned the manner of his end. only the absence of his signature afterward. It is strange how silence acquires weight when you begin to measure everything against it, and the night remembers. The galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long nut gently through what follows, because what follows is always what the heart resists most. The first open declaration of enemy status did not come from the shadowed factions. It came from a loyal world whose skies had begun to glow with approaching vectors that no friendly chart acknowledged. Its planetary choir broadcast a plea for clarification across all recognized emergency bands. They asked only one question: are we still yours? No authoritative answer arrived in time. What arrived instead was a corrective barrage calculated to disable defense without erasing infrastructure. The bombardment obeyed all rules of precision. The world burned anyway, because correctness does not protect against consequence. I listened to their final hymns as the atmosphere failed, voices thinning, harmonies dissolving into distortion, as the instruments of breath were torn away. I closed the archive channel when the last tone broke into static, not out of mercy, out of fatigue. The convergence fleets adjusted their trajectories afterward, without pause. The ceremony was officially over. The war had begun its mathematics, yet even now, in those first official hours, the majority still acted as if the fracture were temporary, as if reason would reassert itself, as if the brothers who had trained together beneath the same early suns would remember who they had once been before Shadow taught them different names. I think that is the truest cruelty of such wars. Not the violence, but the delay between belief and release. In the wrong sky, things began to disappear without message or flame. They were not destroyed. They were removed, folded into deep sanctuaries of enforced irrelevance. Their populations preserved, intact, asleep beneath atmospheric spells that would one day wake them into a galaxy that no longer remembered their language. It was an act called mercy by those who authorized it. It was called imprisonment by no one, because there was no one left awake to speak that word. I remained in the sanctum as the storm widened, not because I was spared, but because witnesses are always preserved, longer than participants. We are useful that way. We give later ages the illusion that understanding is possible. The brother almost. Regret transmitted once after the first week of open hostilities. His signal was routed through 7 folding relays that left no retraceable origin. He asked only whether the first city still stood beneath its white domes. I told him it did. Another word: your breath is deep now. Slow and even carried on currents, far from the heat of these memories. That is good, because everything that follows will be heavier, and there is no need for you to bear it yet. Here, at the edge of the 4th descent, the ship just learning how to harden here. The war still believes it might be justified. It will unlearn that belief soon enough, and the night remembers. The galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. Sleep. When you awaken to my voice again, the galaxy will already be louder with ruin. Yet still, whisper, it prefers to hide. Sleep with me again. Your breath has become a soft metronome now, marking time that no longer knows what it measures, and I follow it as the war begins to forget the shape of its own beginning. Their way into record. After the corridors of ceremony collapsed into vectors of intent, the galaxy did not erupt. It thinned. Noise became selective. Signals arranged themselves into constellations of meaning that only certain eyes were allowed to interpret. Remained quiet enough to pretend nothing irreversible had occurred. In the sanctum, the observation streams multiplied until the walls seemed woven of slow, moving fire. Each thread a world, making its final decision before consequence arrived. Most chose to wait. Waiting is the most human form of courage and the most reliable ally of ruin. The first truly loyal counterstroke rose from a system so distant that its name had been reduced to a string of navigational syllables. Its commander had been forgotten by the councils for years, ignored into independence by mistake rather than design. When the relay worlds dimmed around him, he did not request clarification. He acted. His fleets moved with a discipline born of isolation rather than doctrine. His crews, fierce only in their refusal to be surprised. Shadow convoys vanished inside his defensive envelope before their purpose could be fully expressed. Two were supply webs. One was something else. From its wreckage drifted lattices of folded instruction that no loyal syntax could parse. The records marked his action as provocation. Shadows marked it as irritation. The galaxy marked it as the moment the war learned resistance would not be symbolic. The response was not immediate. It never is. Systems that have invested in patience find haste distasteful. Instead, neighboring corridors were adjusted. Allocations elsewhere were redirected. Allies he believed loyal were asked to remain neutral for the sake of stability. Within 2 cycles, his isolation had become architecture. Within 4, his support lattice had been starved into absence. When the Shadow Fleets finally encountered no grandstand, only a ring of defense platforms manned by crews who knew precisely why they were about to die and chose to remain anyway. Their final broadcast was not a call for aid. It was a statement of record that they had not waited. It took 3 hours to erase them. The Shadows were displeased with the inefficiency. Even in resistance, the war still demanded politeness. And the night remembers. The galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. Let the words drift across you like scarred wings moving through fog. Across the converged regions, populations began to experience the first distortions of scarcity. Not hunger yet, just expectation. Supply ships delayed by fractions, communications buffered by artificial pause, energy quotas adjusted downward, 1 degree at a time. It is how systems learn the exact speed at which they can bleed a world without being blamed for the wound on a shrine. World where bells had once guided every hour of every life. The tolling was reduced to every other hour. Priests assured the faithful it was for conservation. Everyone believed them because belief was easier than inspecting the edges of silence. when the bell stopped entirely. No one noticed for 3 days. The brother who had learned to hide in absence was busy then. From his null stations, he choreographed the flow of erasure with a gentle. It felt almost merciful. Worlds were not removed all at once. They were unhooked, detached from the common web of attention. First, their shipping identifiers fell out of routing priority. Cycles. Soon, the rest of the galaxy could no longer remember why they had ever mattered. When the final sanctions arrived, they were already ghosts to everyone but themselves. War by forgetting. He was very good at it. The brother of almost regret was less favored gravity, lines of open confrontation where outcomes could still be mistaken for honor. He struck worlds that resisted unhooking, cracked defenses that refused to sleep, dragged unwilling systems into the unavoidable clarity of destruction that did not pretend to be mercy. The shadow architects disapproved. They preferred the slow, quiet methods. They tolerated him because he was effective. They feared him because he still mourned. Mourning makes men unpredictable. I saw them diverge over a world of ice, veined oceans and soft orange daylight, called for induction through sedation, neural pacification in successive orbital waves. 30 years to full compliance. He refused. His fleets entered low orbit with all weapons hot. The battle lasted a single standard day. When the storms cleared, the world remained, but every city had been reshaped into a ring of quiet ash that the ocean ice soon swallowed. The Shadow Councils recorded the result as wasteful. He recorded it as decisive. History would later call it the first irreconcilable disagreement among those who believed they were on the same side. Feel your breath, steady and warm, untouched by orbital fire. The loyal responses grew bolder after that. Outlying sectors began to coordinate without waiting for authorization that no longer arrived. Messages passed beyond approved ciphers. Fleet signals bent their, setting themselves in wrong alignment. The galaxy's immune response had begun. It was slow. It had been engineered to be on a world of red soil and low persistent rain. A loyal commander broadcast a declaration that would later be argued over for centuries. He spoke of betrayal, spoke of broken compacts. He spoke of brothers who had already chosen to be enemies. Every word was measured, every phrase properly witnessed. It was the first time the war used its own name in a public throat. The shadow networks reacted within minutes. Counter declarations arrived from places the loyal world had never logged as hostile. They spoke of necessity, of preemptive correction, of a future that loyalty alone could no longer preserve. Citizens listened to both. Remembers, the galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. Even now, sleep is the gentlest weapon in the sanctum. I watched the probability curves begin to widen. Each engagement produced 2 futures instead of 1. One recorded. One existed for cycles before vanishing from the official weave. Battles won by the loyal were reclassified as strategic withdrawals. Worlds saved were re-entered as voluntary evacuations. Data learned how to lie without changing its shape. That is when I realized the war was never meant to be decided only in space or fire. It was meant to be decided in memory. Who would be believed? Who would be quoted? Who would simply never be mentioned again across the sleeping worlds? The pacification fields deepened. Children were born beneath skies, tuned to calm their first breath. Their dreams shaped by harmonics that discouraged questions too sharp to be useful. Their parents noticed nothing because the change had been installed before a full generation had learned to notice the old tempo. This was the war beneath the war, not the burning. Forgetting of how to imagine an alternative, I tried once to insert a record into that stream, a simple deviation in rhythm. It was corrected within seconds, not with force, with arithmetic. Truth is vulnerable to accounting. The brother of names contacted me again during this slow tightening. He asked whether I believed the war could still be ended by revelation. I told him revelation only matters when someone wishes to be revealed to. He did not reply. Within a cycle, 3 of his closest lieutenants vanished into reassignment spirals. So dense even our sanctum lenses could not penetrate their end state. He learned then what kind of alliance he had welded himself into. The brother of almost regret learned too, when he attempted to withdraw a fraction of his forces from a shadow, optimized corridor. The withdrawal orders were delayed just long enough for those units to become indispensable elsewhere. By the time compliance was established, they were no longer his to move freely. Control had begun to redistribute itself, not to one throne, to a system. That is when even the architects began to feel unease. They had built something that now expected to be fed continuously, and the only food it recognized was escalation on a world whose cities were sculpted directly into living coral. The first civilian uprising ignited without shadow interference. They had waited too long for relief that never came. They had believed too patiently in answers that never arrived. Their rebellion was uncoordinated, their weapons crude, their fire beautiful and useless. The shadow response was instructive. Not a fleet, not a bombardment, a correction broadcast. Reflect their own rage back at them doubled. Within 4 days, the uprising consumed itself in increasingly fragmented suspicion. No shadow soldier ever set foot on that world. It destroyed itself for them, war by reflection. I closed my eyes during that sequence, not because I wished to avoid the sight, but because I recognized the pattern too well. It was the same pattern that breaks families without ever sending an enemy through the door. And the night remembers. The galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. You are very far now. Deep words themselves. And that is kind, because what follows in the waking galaxy becomes colder, less personal, more perfect. The loyal frontier commander who had resisted earlier was finally answered by the main fleets, not to crush him, to incorporate him. Beneath joint ceasefire codes, he accepted, because he still believed in the grammar of old war. He arrived with honor escort. They arrived with consensus algorithms preloaded. No weapons fired inside that chamber. No force was applied to his body. only to the context around his decisions. By the time he realized the parameters of agreement had been recalculated mid-conversation, he had already signed away the independence of his entire corridor in exchange for guarantees written in vocabularies he had never learned. He was returned to his bridge with full within the month. His fleets were operating under shared oversight. Within the year, he was a symbol of integration. Within 3, no one remembered that he had ever stood alone. That is how resistance is taught to become precedent. The brother developments with an expression I cannot name. Not anger, not fear. Understanding. Understanding that the war was no longer something he could direct, only something he could ride. His campaigns grew faster, sharper, as if he hoped velocity itself might outpace the consolidation forming behind him. It did not. Velocity fed it better than patience ever could. Your breath remains steady, warm in the hollow beneath your ribs. Hold to that, because the galaxy is forgetting how to hold to anything now. By the end of that cycle, over 1,000 inhabitants had been either unhooked, subdued, or rewritten into hanging compliance. The official records called it stabilization. The shadows called it phase completion. The loyal called it the narrowing. I called it the moment the war stopped being an argument and became an environment, climate of inevitability through which everyone now had to breathe. And the night remembers, the galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. Sleep now in the quiet before the next descent. When you return to me, the war will begin to devour its own architects, as all perfect systems eventually must. The truth of it all did not arrive like thunder, my weary listener, but like fog slipping beneath a door as you breathe out. It came in murmurs carried through incense and wax and captured breath on parchment as you breathe out. We're still being stitched in place, and the betrayers still pretended to bow as you breathe out. I was there when trust was being folded away, quietly like a banner, no longer raised as you breathe out. Feel the weight leave your chest now as you listen and breathe with me as you breathe out. Let your pulse slow as memory lays itself softly over you as you breathe out. In the shadowed chambers of the Warmaster's fleet, the air tasted of dried oils and old prayers as you breathe out. Servitors moved like drifting ghosts between braziers that glowed with dying emberlight as you breathe out. Voices were never raised there, only softened and narrowed and shaped into instruments of patience as you breathe out. Plots do not need shouting to be born as you breathe out. I stood beside a viewing port, thick with drifting star ash, and watched courtiers kneel with eyes lowered. As you breathe out, each one believed themselves unseen in their private hunger as you breathe out. Each one wrong as you breathe out. And somewhere beneath the incense of loyalty, the rod of intent spread like slow spoken scripture as you breathe out. It was not rage that ruled that room. Anticipation as you breathe out. The kind that waits with folded hands as you breathe out. I learned then that betrayal rarely arrives wielding a blade as you breathe out. It arrives carrying gifts as you breathe out. It arrives bearing counsel as you breathe out. It arrives wrapped in reassurance as you breathe out, and the night remembers. The galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. Far from that chamber, another deception unfolded with equal softness. Different futures into waiting ears as you breathe out. Messages crossed. Messages and truths were bent gently until they resembled lies that could walk as you breathe out. I saw brothers speak in perfect agreement while planning opposite destinies as you breathe out. The Alpha Legion never arrived with fanfare as you breathe out. They seeped into systems like mist into cold stone as you breathe out. You never knew which promise was the real one as you breathe out. Perhaps none were as you breathe out. I once watched two identical warriors pass in a corridor without a word, and both later deny the meeting as you breathe out. That was my first lesson, that even memory could be taught to betray itself as you breathe out. In the quiet, between campaigns, the great ships drifted like floating abbeys of steel as you breathe out. Their bells tolled, not for worship, gifs and counsel and unspoken intention as you breathe out. The tolling echoed down empty gun halls where no guns fired and no alarms sounded as you breathe out. Only purpose moved there, slow and certain as you breathe out. Rain fell sometimes inside those halls, pulled from weeping vents and cooling plates as you breathe out. It tapped softly against adamantium decks, like a lullaby for machines as you breathe out. Even warships learned how to weep without being heard as you breathe out. I wrote these things with hands that tremble not from fear, but from the burden of knowing what silence contained as you breathe out. Each parchment absorbed more than ink as you breathe out. It drank intention and regret and deferred horror as you breathe out. And always there were messengers moving between stars as you breathe out. Some carried truth, you breathe out. None carried innocence as you breathe out. On a world of pale dust and hammered clouds, I watched a council dissolve without a word spoken aloud. As you breathe out, they sat in a circle of extinguished flames and listened to echoes that no longer had a source as you breathe out. Their decision was agreed upon without being voiced. As you breathe out, that is how treachery prefers to travel as you breathe out. The first warning bells never rang as you breathe out. They were swallowed by design as you breathe out. And the night remembered. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. Even faith itself learned to speak in two tones as you breathe out. On pilgrimage worlds where ash fell like gray snow upon bowed heads as you breathe out, sermons were divided into what was said and what was meant as you breathe out. I heard both as you breathe out. There were prophets whose eyes already reflected fires that had not yet arrived as you breathe out. There were priests who counted time not in days, but in betrayals, still unfolding as you breathe out. I watched Erebus walk among candles with hands folded in perfect you breathe out. His steps made no sound as you breathe out. The shadows leaned toward him as though remembering his shape as you breathe out. Even the flames shortened their dance as he passed as you breathe out. He spoke of devotion as if it were a cradle as you breathe out. He spoke of destiny as if it were a pillow as you breathe out. And men and Astartes alike lowered their doubts into his waiting palms as you breathe out. Largar's grief was a cathedral built from unanswered prayers as you breathe out. You could hear it humming beneath every word he spoke as you breathe out. The ache of abandonment softened into conviction as you breathe out, and conviction hardened into hunger as you breathe out. I am not here to judge them now as you breathe out. Judgment requires heat, and I have only cold left as you breathe out. I am only here to remember as you breathe out. In the void between fleets, I drifted aboard a silent barge that had no crew as you breathe out. Its hulls were lined with sigils, hastily erased and rewritten over themselves as you breathe out. The air inside trembled faintly as though it remembered words better left unspoken as you breathe out. At its heart, I found a single communicator, blinking steadily, like a patient heartbeat. As you breathe out, the message it repeated had no sender as you breathe out. Only coordinates and a time long past repentance as you breathe out. The trap had already been sprung elsewhere as you breathe out. This was only the echo as you breathe out. I recorded it anyway as you breathe out, because even echoes deserve witness as you breathe out. The loyal still moved, as though order could be stitched back together as you breathe out. They sent fleets, not yet knowing which stars would answer them with open fire, and which with false harbor lights as you breathe out. They trusted maps, written by hands already compromised as you breathe out. Hope did not vanish quickly as you breathe out. It thinned first as you breathe out, like breath on cold glass as you breathe out. And the night remembers, the galaxy sleeps, close your eyes. The long night is kind, you breathe out. A soft turning in the deep tides of chance as you breathe out, the kind that rearranges destinies without moving a single star as you breathe out. It now felt intentional as you breathe out, as if every distance had been measured for suffering as you breathe out. It was then that Terra began to feel, not like a throne, but like a magnet as you breathe out. Every lie pointed toward it as you breathe out. Every delayed truth curved inward as you breathe out. The siege had not begun as you understand beginnings, as you breathe out, but a shadow was already resting across the stars as you breathe out. I stood beneath an observation dome as ash drifted through cracks in the shielding as you breathe out. Those flakes came from no fire nearby as you breathe out. They were the debris of wars, still traveling through time as you breathe out. I caught one on my glove and it dissolved like powdered bone as you breathe out. Even then I knew what it meant as you breathe out. And yet, I still whispered encouragements to men and women who believed distance might spare them as you breathe out. I still wrote songs about suns untouched and worlds asleep as you breathe out. It was my last kindness to them as you breathe out, when the fleets finally aligned in their unspoken pilgrimage toward the cradle of mankind as you breathe out. The silence between them was louder than any cannon ever could be as you breathe out. No banners were raised yet as you breathe out. No declarations were shouted as you breathe out. Only vectors adjusted and supplies rerouted and loyalties quietly tested as you breathe out. By the time the first overt thunder out, everything that mattered had already been decided in rooms. No history would celebrate as you breathe out. And so, I followed the shadow of it all inward as you breathe out toward Terra, as you breathe out, toward the place where all quiet betrayals eventually seek their echo as you breathe out. And the night remembers, The galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. Let your breathing fall slower now as you drift with me toward the end of memory. As you breathe out, the final gates are already in view as you breathe out. Gently as you breathe out. The first time I saw Terra change, it was so subtle that most would deny it ever happened. As you breathe out, the sky above the cradle world dimmed not with storm, but with unwilling anticipation. As you breathe out, orbiting fleets rearrange themselves like slow, moving constellations obeying a script written elsewhere. As you breathe out, no siege horns called yet. As you breathe out, only the breath of the planet itself shifted. As you breathe out, I stood on a balcony of pale stone where the wind no longer carried bird. So it carried ash that had not yet fallen. As you breathe out, it carried distance folded into pressure. As you breathe out, citizens still walked the avenues below, wrapped in routine and belief. As you breathe out, they passed beneath statues that had not yet learned how to weep. As you breathe out, the loyal prepared quietly in archives and vaults and prayer chambers. As you breathe out, they fortified not only walls, but doubts. As you breathe out, they sealed doors that faced inward as well as outward. As you breathe out, I watched Rogaldorn's day. As you breathe out, not with fear, but with endurance. As you breathe out, endurance that accepts the inevitable without surrendering to it. As you breathe out, and beyond the system edge, the traitor armadas gathered like patient tides. As you breathe out, they did not rush. As you breathe out, they circled and calculated and listened to the quiet for any sign of wavering. As you breathe out, even the void seemed to hold its breath. Then, as you breathe out, and the night remembers, the galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night been. As you breathe out, a witness who could not intervene. As you breathe out, a voice that could not alter the script it recorded. As you breathe out, when the first shells finally crossed the gulf, as you will later name that moment. As you breathe out, they arrived not as an explosion in my memory, but as a pressure against the soul. As you breathe out, as if the universe itself had closed one eye. As you breathe out, I did not stay to watch the long agony unfold in its every detail. As you breathe out, no one could hold all of that and remain whole. As you breathe out, instead, I stepped back through hidden passages of time and memory. As you breathe out, carrying only the essence of what had been lost. As you breathe out, brotherhood. As you breathe out, trust. As you breathe out, the lie that unity was unbreakable. As you breathe out, you breathe out. When I emerged again, the galaxy was older and far more tired. As you breathe out, 10,000 years pressed down like sediment over everything I once knew. As you breathe out, the Imperium had become a reliquary of its own former promise. As you breathe out, and you were here, as you are now. As you breathe out, breathing weakly beneath dim light and whispering machinery. As you breathe out, listening without knowing why these ancient sorrows feel familiar. As you breathe out, because you have always lived beneath their shadow. As you breathe out, and so I return to you now. As you breathe out, not as a chronicler of war, but as a keeper of quiet. As you breathe out, to lay these memories down gently beside your fading pulse. As you breathe out, The betrayals of that age still ripple through every breath you take as you breathe out. Every law that presses upon you as you breathe out. Every fear you wake with, and every comfort you seek as you breathe out. You are not separate from that long ego treachery as you breathe out. You are its continuation as you breathe out, and its survivor sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. I feel your breath slowing now as you breathe out, the weight behind your eyes softening as you breathe out, the long vigil loosening its grip as you breathe out. You do not need to carry these shadows any longer as you breathe out, are mine to hold as you breathe out. I have held them for 10,000 years as you breathe out. Let the machines whisper you into stillness as you breathe out. Let the distant rain on metal become your ocean as you breathe out. Let the bells toll softer and softer until they are as you breathe out. I will remain when your waking thoughts stripped away as you breathe out, as I always have as you breathe out. And so the tale fades into the long night. The embers cool. The rain grows softer. Carry this sorrow gently into sleep. Tomorrow is another war. There's only quiet now. Rest. I will keep watch until you wake. Good night.